Okay, it is a couple of minutes after noon, and I want to respect everyone's time. But thank you for all for being here and for being patient with us as we start today's meeting. My name is Menominee Boyd, and I am a community outreach specialist at BTA. And I will be going over the agenda today with you. And as we start, I just want to let you all know that the meeting is being recorded and it'll be posted on the CAP webpage on BTA's website so that individuals who cannot attend today will be able to get the same information that you all are receiving on this afternoon. And with that, we'll go ahead and start. Again, welcome to the Lunch and Learn on Adapting to Climate Change in Santa Clara County. Again, my name is Menominee, and I am a public communications specialist at VTA. And we will talk about our etiquette for today. And please forgive me our PowerPoint on today. Let me just start by saying that it is running a little bit behind, so trying to make sure that that's okay. And let's see. Okay, and this is our etiquette. We would like for you to treat everyone with kindness and respect. Please participate. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear your opinions. But please know that everyone's input matters. So please respect those who differ from you, and it makes space for everyone to contribute. We would ask for you to listen and understand. And again, that this event is being recorded and we will post it. And I'm really nice, but I need to let you know that BTA will not tolerate any type of demeaning or discriminatory behavior or speech. I have never had to do this. I've been doing this for the last couple of years. I've never had to remove anyone from a meeting for not adhering to this code of conduct. So I want to keep my perfect record. So I just ask everyone to just be kind and just, again, respect everyone that's on the call today or that's in the meeting today. Okay. And then how you can participate on the Zoom. We will be taking your questions at the end of the meeting. But in order to talk, you just click the, I'll let you speak, raise your hand, and then you can unmute yourself. I'll just let you know when it's time. And then you can ask the questions and then we'll give you the answer. Staff will answer them for you. And again, that'll happen at the end of the meeting. So if you have burning questions, you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and then staff will be able to see those questions as well. So if you think you will forget, put it in there, and then we can address those as well. Okay, and then today's agenda. Again, this is welcome, and then we'll have our introductions. Then we'll go over our panel presentations, and then we'll have our question and answer session. Okay. And at this juncture, I'm going to hand it off to Brianne Boyle, who is the Senior Sustainability Analyst for the County of Santa Clara in their Office of Sustainabilities. And she will go over introductions with you. Brianne?
Thank you, Menominee. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. My name is Brianne and I will be today's moderator. We have two panelists today, Lonnie Lee Ho, Senior Environmental Planner at VTA, and Brian Mendenhall, Senior Water Resources Specialist at Valley Water. In addition, we have Patty Boonloo and Menominee Boyd, who you just met from VTA, to help us with answering questions and advancing the slides. Next slide. So to get us started, I'd like to share an update on the county's climate efforts. The county is developing our climate action plan, which is called the Climate Roadmap. And the roadmap will outline actions the county and its partners will take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so we can limit the impacts from climate change. We anticipate releasing the roadmap for public comment next month. You can stay updated on our project website, which we'll put in the chat. We have also developed the climate network map, which you're seeing a screenshot on the slide here. This is an online tool to connect stakeholders to advance climate action by sharing information about what agencies and organizations are working on locally related to climate action and adaptation. You can access the tool at climatenetworksec.org, and we also have a link to that in the chat. And you can use this tool to find climate action plans, greenhouse gas emissions inventories, and related public reports for cities and other agencies. You can learn about each city's climate efforts and goals, and you can search a directory of organizations, filtering by location and sector to find potential partners. Next slide. So before we dive into the presentations from VTA and Valley Water, I'm going to give some context to the climate crisis in our county. In Santa Clara County, we have been experiencing our climate changing and the impacts that these changes bring. In the past 3 years alone, we've experienced increased frequency and severity of wildfires, heat records being broken, and one of the busiest storm seasons. And all of these climate effects are stress multipliers that amplify existing inequities in the county. The projected increase in climate change-induced extreme heat, sea level rise, precipitation, and wildfire will amplify existing inequities in housing affordability, food security, income, education, and health outcomes. As seen during the pandemic, certain populations, based on their social economic characteristics and the conditions of the built environment where they live, are at higher risk of being harmed from present and future climate events. Any further delay in acting to combat climate change will make a livable future that much harder to secure. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've experienced increased frequency and severity of wildfires. The data that you're seeing here reflect local impacts from the 2020 SCU lightning complex fire, which resulted in widespread damage. The fires burned over 165,000 acres in our county alone. And the county incurred significant costs for repairs to roads, bridges, parks, and recreational facilities, and debris removal. Next slide. We've also seen heat records being broken continuously. The August to September 2022 heat wave was one of the hottest and longest in California for September ever. Temperatures in San Jose reach 109 degrees, while Gilroy experienced 115 degrees. Longer, more frequent, and more severe extreme heat events are expected to occur in our county. Next slide. From December 2022 to March of this year, we experienced a record number of strong back-to-back atmospheric rivers that led to flooding, power outages, landslides, and devastated farmlands. These events are very much in line with the climate projections I've shared, which alert us to an increase in extreme wet and dry periods. Hence, we've experienced severe drought conditions followed by large storm events. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Patty to do a poll.
All right, everyone. So now that you've heard about some of the impacts of climate change our county is already experiencing, we want to hear from you. And I do want to note that we want to create a safe and encouraging space here and understand that talking about climate change impacts can cause distress. So please only fill out the poll if you are comfortable. Menominee, can you go ahead? All right, so we have the poll here. Which of these climate hazards concern you the most? Sea level rise, flooding due to extreme rain, extreme heat, wildfire, or drought? And I'll give it a few minutes before we close the poll. All right, I hope most of you were able to answer the poll if you are comfortable. Menominee, can you go ahead and close that and share the result with the group, please? All right, so it seems like the #1 top concern for the participants today are extreme heat and drought. Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Lonnie.
Thank you, Patty. Next slide, please, nominee. All right, I am here to talk with you about how VTA is planning for climate change. Next slide, please. To begin, I think it's important to recognize that VTA's leadership takes climate change very seriously. In 2020, right before the pandemic shut down, VTA's board of directors formally declared a climate emergency in response to the massive challenges posed by the climate crisis. Among other things, this resolution committed VTA to prepare a climate action plan. Next slide. So our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, or CAP for short, has 3 objectives. It seeks to quantify greenhouse gas emissions generated from transportation use in the county, to identify measures to reduce GHG emissions, and to conduct a vulnerability assessment to better understand how transportation assets, such as VTA's bus routes and light rail transit system, will be affected by climate change. Next. This topic will be the focus of today's presentation. So while the CAP does all 3 of these things, I'm going to hone in specifically on this risk assessment and adaptation planning process. Next slide, please. So this process has 4 phases or steps. The first phase is about exploring and defining and initiating the project and adaptation specifically. So the definition that we chose for adaptation is at the top of the screen, and that is an action or set of actions that reduce physical climate risk. So in the context of this CAP, climate change adaptation refers to building resilience of VTA's assets and operations in response to the current or expected effects of climate change. This first phase was completed in 2022. Phase 2 is about assessing vulnerability, and I'm going to share some of the results with you today of our vulnerability assessment. Phase 3 is about developing adaptation strategies and actions based on the results of the vulnerability assessment. And this is the step where we're at today in the process. And so your input is welcome on any of the proposed strategies and actions that we are presenting. And these are described in further detail in Chapter 5 of our draft CAP, which is posted online, and I'll share with you in a little while. And then finally, Phase 4 takes place after VTA completes the CAP, and this will occur in 2024. Next slide, please. These are the climate hazards that we evaluated. Permanent coastal inundation, also known as sea level rise, temporary coastal flooding, which is sea level rise plus storm surge, extreme heat, temporary urban or inland flooding from our rivers and waterways, wildfire, and drought. Next slide. Extreme heat poses significant health risks for all of us. It impacts our transit users who are waiting for buses and trains to arrive. And these transit users may also need to wait longer for trains, since trains during extreme heat events need to slow their speeds in order to prevent overheating of brake systems and accidents related to heat kinks in the track, which are caused from heat. Bicyclists and pedestrians, of course, are affected as they are walking and biking in very hot temperatures. Outdoor workers are also affected. This includes VTA maintenance staff, for example, as shown in this picture, working on overhead catenary systems. These are the wires above the light rail trains. And these lines are known to sag during extreme heat events and require repairs. Next slide. So some of the adaptation actions that we have come with to deal with extreme heat are installing cooling amenities in areas where they do not yet exist and where feasible. These include things like hydration stations on station platforms and in maintenance areas to ensure that riders and VTA staff have access to drinking water. Additional seating under pre-existing shade platforms, additional shaded areas at park and ride lots, bike racks, platforms, and so on. Another action is to potentially shift outdoor physical labor hours for VTA workers to earlier in the morning during extreme heat events and allow for flexible hours and remote work, as well as develop and share emergency preparedness tips and safety communications with employees. This is just a few of the adaptation actions posed to help cope with extreme heat. Next slide. So this slide shows VTA's bus routes exposed to temporary urban flooding. So you can see that flooding really impacts VTA's system and roads throughout the county pretty much everywhere. And the gray dots or gray circles correspond to the average daily boardings or ridership on VTA system. So the larger that gray circle, the larger the ridership. So you can see some of those high ridership areas in downtown San Jose, as well as those important key connection points with Caltrain or light rail or other modes of transit. So some of the adaptation actions that we've identified to help address temporary flooding include identifying alternative transit routes and modes of transportation and develop protocols for service disruptions or temporary closures during climate hazard events, and ensuring effective communication with riders and VTA staff about those closures. We could also prioritize nature-based solutions to address flooding, and this may include coordination with other agencies, such as Valley Water, to restore wetland and riparian habitats on floodplains to further slow down the flow of floodwaters and hold soil in its place. Could also install permeable pavement to minimize flood risk and procure additional and appropriate temporary flood protection barriers to be better prepared during a temporary flood event. Next slide. VTA's service area is mapped on this slide with our wildfire threat conditions. So the yellow and orange signify high and very high wildfire threat. Notice in particular the assets in South County are vulnerable here, but note that wildfire can occur anywhere, of course, and it can spread quickly. So some of the adaptation actions that we are looking at to deal with wildfire threat are to manage adjacent trees and vegetation in a way that minimizes risk of wildfire ignition and spread, conducting safety audits and inspections across our system to identify and address potential safety risks to riders and VTA staff that would be caused or exacerbated by climate hazards, and also ensure that indoor facilities, buses, and trains are equipped with air filtration systems to protect public health from wildfire smoke and the harmful effects of particulate matter pollution. Next slide, please. These sets of maps show the exposure to sea level rise and storm surge of our light rail system. So the map on the left side shows the risk of permanent coastal flooding or sea level rise. And the map on the right shows temporary flooding with sea level rise plus storm surge by 2050. So take a look at the orange line in particular, and take a look at the map on the right. So you'll see that 20% or 3.44 miles of this track of the orange line is vulnerable to flooding. Next slide, please. Some of the adaptation actions for light rail in this area of sea level rise and coastal flooding include coordinating with VTA member agencies to explore the establishment of a countywide climate resilience district to fund or finance climate adaptation projects and programs, to collaborate with partnering organizations to encourage and expedite shoreline protection and restoration projects, as well as incorporate future sea level rise, permanent inundation, and precipitation projections into our long-term infrastructure and planning processes. Next slide. So I know that was a lot of information that I threw at you, but all of it is contained in our draft Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which is currently out and available for review. We want to hear from you. We want to hear if these adaptation actions that we proposed, that we drafted, and we developed are of interest. Did we get it right? Should we narrow it down? Should we prioritize? Is there anything we're missing? That's all the kind of feedback that we're looking for. And you can submit your feedback 2 ways. You can submit comments online using this form, or you can simply email your comments to that address. And we'll share this again a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, our next panelist.
Okay, next slide, please. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Mendenhall. I'm with Valley Water. Thank you, Lonnie and Brianne. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about Valley Water's Climate Change Action Plan and how this relates to the topics today. So Valley Water has been working in the climate field for quite some time. I would say we've been a little bit ahead of the curve, ahead of certainly much of the legislation that's recently come out. We considered ourselves carbon neutral based on our old framework of measuring climate impacts, and we're currently in the process of updating that framework, and so we're going to have some work to do to remain neutral. However, our work in the past with our clean fleets, with solar panels at our facilities, with purchasing clean energy, all of this has really been one aspect of our climate plan, but what I'm going to talk about today is really the climate adaptation side. Next slide. So Valley Water's Climate Change Action Plan was adopted by our board of directors in July of 2021. At that time, our overall plan came together and included 7 goals. The first 3 had to do with climate mitigation. Those roughly align with scopes 1, 2, and 3 for those familiar with kind of the intricacies of climate mitigation. And so we're making updates to those now with a greenhouse gas reduction plan in the works currently. But the rest of our climate plan has to do with climate adaptation. So that's what you see here, goals 4 through 7. This has to do with the 3 primary areas of Valley Water's business, which are water supply, flood protection, and ecosystem services, and also adds in the element of emergency preparedness. As we pulled together this climate change action plan, we put a lot of emphasis on strategies. And so I'll go through some of those today. And along with those strategies, we also developed what we called flagship metrics. So these were ways to measure what our current state is, or our baseline, versus an identified target. And then we also went ahead and identified some priority actions. So what are the next things we can do to really push forward with each of these goals? So as we went through some prioritization process to really identify what were the high priority actions, we ended up identifying 117 different adaptation actions, and 60 of those were considered high priority. These were prioritized based on the risk of impact, co-benefits, effectiveness, some stakeholder input, as well as the cost. So today, as we move forward, I'm going to jump in a little bit with some more details on water supply, flood, ecosystem adaptation, and emergency preparedness. So next slide, please. So water supply adaptation. Water supply is far and above the oldest component of Valley Water's mission. Back to the 20s, we were formed and really had to help manage our groundwater. We were seeing subsidence as you got closer to the bay, and we were able to stop that subsidence and really expand our mission for water supply. So our strategies here really reflect on the different types of work we do for water supply, and I think really show the things that we need to do to combat climate change. So a good example would be diversifying local water supplies. You see here the giant tank, which is part of our advanced water treatment plant out by Zanker Road. And that's the whole idea there, is to have more local control of our water. And a key way of doing that is recycled water. Now, of course, we can only do indirect potable reuse at this time, but as we move forward and work with the State Water Board, we do have hopes of converting that to direct potable reuse, which really will make a huge difference in being able to use even more of our water in a recycled way. So that helps us reduce imported water. We won't have to worry about importing as much water. We'll be able to rely locally. So that's one key element that's very sustainable. Another element that I'll mention here is you'll see the no grass lawn in this house photo here. And the idea there is looking at water conservation. So Valley Water has a long history of providing landscape rebates. We continue to do that. Part of that is, I believe, through our Safe Clean Water program. We get grants from the state to help maintain that. And while it really started off during extended drought periods, we're really trying to get the point across that we should be conserving water whether or not we're in a drought. We should use less water and really be able to use that water for more important things than maybe just some grass out in your front yard. So those are two big things. And as I mentioned before, flagship metrics. We've got a couple metrics here associated with these. So for recycled water, our goal is to have 10% of our water portfolio be fulfilled by recycled water by 2030. We're currently at 6%, so we're making great strides. And then our goal for water conservation is to conserve 109,000 acre feet annually. And we're currently at about just over 80,000. So again, making good progress, but a long way to go. And Valley Water can't do it alone. We rely on everyone in the county to push these forward. So next slide. All right, so flood risk adaptation. Again, flood protection is a key component of Valley Water's work. While we only manage about 1/3 of the stream miles in the county, and we partner with others to manage the shoreline, including the Army Corps and the State Coastal Conservancy, we are really invested in providing as much protection as possible on a normal basis. Any given year with our wet winters or our drought cycles, but also considering sea level rise. So for all of our projects that do have some kind of coastal influence, we are considering climate change. We generally look at the Army Corps of Engineers standard of 2 to 2.6 feet as kind of the level we're trying to meet. And we've actually recently, our staff that work in our hydrology and hydraulics unit, which is the group that's measuring flow, they're trying to gauge, what flood events could happen, what the level of severity, what the risk from those events would be. They've actually looked at several different models of sea level rise recently, including Army Corps, as I mentioned, and NOAA, the National Oceanic Administration. And so they found that those numbers are pretty valid. They're working well. And so, the combination of building up, having enough extra space at the top of levees to accommodate those extra flows, those are all things that we're actually incorporating into our work. So, that covers the coastal issue. I saw some of the maps that we were seeing that could influence or impact some of the VTA facilities. One big project that will help with that, of course, is what we call the Shoreline Project. That is a partnership, as I mentioned, with the Army Corps and the Coastal Conservancy. And that project's really being done in 3 main phases. So the first phase is closest to Alviso, so downtown or downstream of San Jose. And that is traditionally considered an area of kind of economic disadvantage. And so we know that we need to protect that area as soon as possible. So that's sort of the first phase. The second phase is all the way over by Palo Alto. And then the third phase is kind of filling in the middle with Sunnyvale. The order is really based on kind of who is ready to partner and move forward with their projects. But certainly all of those areas in the entire shoreline of Santa Clara County will be protected. It may take out to perhaps 2060. So I know that seems like a really long ways away, but we're steadily making progress. And again, it's not any one agency, it's a number of agencies with the project of this size. So we can go to the next slide. The third element that I'd like to cover here is the environmental stewardship or ecosystem component of adaptation. Now, to me, this one's always been a little bit harder to, how does climate change relate to the environment? Not for people per se, but for the actual natural environment. And a couple of key ways I think that we can address here are one, maintaining vegetation. You want to have native vegetation, natural vegetation that can sustain over time, even with increased heat. Maybe that means adapting to some new types of plants as well. But one of the keys there is actually maintaining invasive plants. They thrive in these less than ideal conditions. So here's a photo of arundo, which is a pretty nasty weed, and you can just see how high that's gotten. I was shocked when I saw how small the people look compared to these weeds. And this is an ongoing program that Valley Water helps with, and others. We call our invasive plant management program. We continue to look for ways to expand on that. And then next to that, you'll see this map here, which is looking at what we call our Calabasas San Tomas Aquino project. And what this is doing is actually trying to realign the end of the creek as it approaches the tidal marsh to help move sediment out to the marsh. Part of the reason we need to do this is if we can build up the ecotone or marsh area, it'll help alleviate some of the impact of sea level rise, and it also has the dual benefit of enhanced habitat in those areas. So that's a pretty exciting project that's been getting quite a bit of grant funding. So I think there's a lot of interest by the state as well as the EPA, I believe, gave us some funding. So we're really excited about that one. Next slide. So last but not least, for our goals under Valley Water's Climate Change Action Plan, we also have a goal on emergency preparedness. And I always felt like this one was especially important because it's really looking at how do we share information with the public and really develop what we call emergency action plans. So at this point, we have 21 different plans developed. Some of these are individual plans for facilities or things Valley Water does. Some are actually joint action plans. There's one with City of San Jose, the San Jose Joint Action Plan. We recently added Upper Penitencia Creek, which is kind of this orange line on the map. And then we've also just recently updated one for the Lower Peninsula watershed. So that's essentially Stevens Creek over to San Francisco Creek. So over time, we're going to continue to develop these. I believe we have about 49 total that we're seeking to accomplish. This is largely funded through our Safe Clean Water program. And so we're trying to achieve 2 new ones per year, essentially. But if anyone is interested in learning more about the emergency action plans, or if there is one for your particular area, I encourage you to reach out to me and we can certainly get you that information. And I believe that is my last slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Brianne.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Lonnie, so much for your presentations. I know I learned a couple new things as well, and hopefully everyone that's participating did too. So now we're going to move on to Q&A. We'll start with questions that we received in the Q&A so far, but you can also raise your hand and we will take you off mute and you can ask your question live. So please, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. We've gotten a couple questions so far, so I'll start with those. First, a question for Lonnie that Sarah asks. She says, in the draft CAP plan, there's 2 different measures that talk about tree shading. What does your vision for this look like? Urban trees also play a big role in stormwater management.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sarah. So I think we definitely need to partner with some agencies that have already conducted an urban tree canopy study or survey. I know that there's been a lot of work in the county, and I think some current new efforts are emerging as well. So we do need to understand the tree cover that's out there. We need to increase tree cover to reduce the urban heat island effect. But we also have to be mindful of what these trees need and make sure that we select trees that require very low maintenance, low water needs, and are also native species. There's a lot of problem trees out there, like eucalyptus, tree of heaven, black locust, that our agencies are trying to eradicate and avoid. So we also have to ensure that trees are maintained after planting. You can't just plant the tree and walk away. We need to make sure that they are watered and survive drought conditions. And we also have to make sure that we don't plant trees in areas that are, prone to wildfire. So I agree. I think trees play a big role in not only stormwater management, but also reducing the urban heat island effect, as I mentioned. And so I think our vision is, working with others to increase tree cover throughout the county, especially in those areas that need it the most.
Thank you, Lonnie. And I see Sarah actually has their hand up. So I don't know if it's a clarifying point to that question, but if we want to unmute Sarah, she can add to that.
Yeah, hi. I'm the forester in San Jose, and around tree planting and tree selection and all of that, urban systems are completely different than natural systems. They're engineered, they're completely engineered, and our native trees don't survive in them very well. Plus, as we're facing increased urban heat and the weather is going to be changing, we have to think of pulling trees that are from south of us to the north. It's a concept called assisted migration. So I just would like to be really careful around advocating always for natives.
Thank you, Sarah. Really valid point. Thank you so much. And I also did see that Google tool that you provided a link to. I meant to type an answer that yes, we have seen it, but I accidentally clicked the wrong button about answering it live. So thank you for sharing that resource. We were taking a look at it with our GIS team recently, so haven't dived deeply into it, but we're definitely aware. So thank you.
And maybe actually Patty or Menominee, you could repost that link in the chat to Google's tool so everyone can see it. It looks like someone else has their hand up. Eugene, if someone could unmute Eugene and ask your question.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Eugene Bradley, Silicon Valley Transit users. Got a couple of questions regarding this great informative report that you're doing regarding climate change and VTA's proposal. My first question regards the use of trees. I understand that VTA also, given that VTA also builds, designs highways in addition to providing public transit, has it ever been considered to use trees instead of building physical sound walls to help absorb the sound? Such trees, when implemented properly, would help absorb the carbon monoxide and other dust particles from vehicles, as opposed to a sound wall, plus provide a natural way to absorb sound as well. My second question comes in regards to air filters on transit vehicles and facilities. Has VTA considered implementing MERV 14 air filters aboard its vehicles and facilities? This is something BART does as well to not only offset smoke and particles, but also helps to proactively kill airborne germs such as COVID, etc.? Thank you.
So I can answer those questions. Thanks, Eugene, and thank you for being here. So in regards to sound walls, VTA does follow standards and protocol that Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation Agency, establishes, right, for statewide protocol. And so, yeah, that's what we are required to follow. We do noise analysis, noise abatement decisions, and you know, that may include a variety of things, and you know, outside of just sound walls. So I hope that answers your question there. And then regarding air filters, I would need to check with our operations team specifically on installing these particular filters that you mentioned. But I will confirm that in our CAP, we do have it as an adaptation action of looking into ensuring that our trains are equipped with filters to filter out any wildfire smoke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Okay, I'm going to pivot to a question we received in the Q&A. This is actually for Brian. And then I see, Betsy, you have your hand raised, so then we'll go to you. But the question for Brian is from Andrew. Can you please explain direct versus indirect recycled potable water?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question, Andrew. And as soon as I had said that, I was like, wait a second, some people don't know what that means. So great question. So essentially, indirect recycled water is using, you'll know the term purple pipes. It's using recycled water for irrigation, essentially. It's for all those uses that isn't actually drinking the water. So that's really indirect. Direct would actually be being able to put recycled water directly into the ground and into the system for actual drinking, for consumption by people. Currently, that is not allowed by law, but it's certainly something many water districts are interested in kind of pushing that to the next level and allowing that. The water treatment that does occur in the advanced water treatment plant I showed the photo of is essentially the water is like cleaner than rainwater. I mean, it's so clean that it almost tastes a little bit off just because it's too clean. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll blend it with, you know, other drinkable water, just so it tastes, you know, kind of what you're used to. But we're to the point now where that recycled water is completely safe for consumption. We're just trying to get the legislation to catch up. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And Betsy, you have your hand raised. If someone could unmute Betsy and you can ask your question.
Hi, so Betsy Magus. I am a member of the VTA Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, speaking for myself. While we have both Valley Water and VTA on the call here, a quick thing about the recycled water. The water in my home is extremely hard. I periodically scrape crud off of the inside of my shower. So one advantage to using the very clean recycled water might be to rebalance that a little towards the softer side. The main question I asked, I just finished writing, so I posted it in the Q&A also. But my husband and I use the Creek Trail Network, chiefly Santa Mosaquino and Guadalupe River trails, to commute by bicycle. And in doing so, we reduce our impacts by some number of thousands of car miles per year. And I'd like to make a general request to consider the trail networks as transportation corridors, because they really are the best places to ride a bicycle. You're away from car traffic and it feels just so much safer. But the creek trails flood when we have heavy rains. It's routinely the underpasses will be underwater. And the underpasses are how you cross big streets like, 101 and Santa Mas Expressway, Montague Expressway. So for projects that I see coming that have trail impacts like the Lower Guadalupe project and the Marsh Reconnection project, I'd like to request that Valley Water engage early and often with the bicycle community, both to reduce construction impacts. So there was a closure on the Santa Mas Trail in September, and it was not done very gracefully. The detour was out into traffic, and there was a lot more closed than needed to be closed for what they were doing. But that was the way the permits were written, so that was what we had. So reduce construction impacts. I think we could do a lot better than we did. And also about opportunities to improve things. So like the Lower Guadalupe project, I think the plan is to raise the levees by, 3 feet or something. Can we also raise some of the underpasses that spend most of the winter and spring underwater, so that the trail will be passable for more people more of the time? And just generally keep in touch so that we're not rebuilding something that's not as great as it could be. So thank you.
If I may, this is Brian. Thank you for those comments, Betsy. And I can just say that one of my close colleagues is actually the project manager for the Lower Guadalupe project. So I'm happy to pass along that information. And then it would also be good to know, I guess, a little bit more about the impacts for Calabasas, Santa Masakino. So I can put my email in the chat, and if you'd like to reach out afterward, we can take this offline, but I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to some questions in the Q&A. This is actually a question for both Lonnie and Brian. What criteria was used to evaluate and select actions to be priority? This person jotted down some notes about risk of impact, co-benefits, and cost, but didn't catch all the different criteria.
Yeah, I'll go first if that's okay, Brian.
Yep.
This is a great question. So VTA looked at conceptual costs. So you've got that one down, and that cost, included looking at these actions in terms of, okay, are they already identified in our budget, or would they require additional funding? So it's a very high level cost exercise, but that was definitely one criteria. Another one was how much jurisdictional control would VTA have over these assets, right? So obviously, if we own the asset, then we have direct control and it's very easy to make change. But if we don't, we have more of an indirect control, and we might be limited to, simply influencing change or encouraging and working with partners to, coordinate, encourage the change for them to make the change. We also looked at time frame of the implementation, how long it would take. And we looked at co-benefits on the environmental and equity side. So environmental co-benefits included things like air, water, habitat, GHG emission reduction, and equity, we looked at, whether or not the action would directly or indirectly enhance social equity by providing benefits to vulnerable and disadvantaged populations.
Yeah, and I think for Valley Water, you captured most of them. So and I'll encourage folks to take a look at our published climate change action plan. We put the link in the chat. It has some description of the actual process, but the criteria we had looked at included, I'm losing it here. Where was it? So the risk of impact, as you mentioned, co-benefits. So oftentimes climate projects are hand in hand with something else. So we'd be doing a flood project, but we want to consider the climate impact, or we're looking at water supply, but we want to do it in the most resilient, sustainable way. So it's often, it's not often that climate projects kind of stand on their own. And for Valley Water, they're usually part of something else. So those are kind of the co-benefits or multi-benefit projects. Effectiveness. So, how easy would it be to put something in action? Certainly, we did a lot of stakeholder outreach when we developed our CCAP, and so trying to figure out what was important to people, and then of course cost. So you had most of them, but I think kind of the effectiveness and stakeholder feedback were the other two that we considered. And we really just, I'll say that we didn't list our actions from, 1 to 200 in that order. We really grouped them together. So sort of high priority, medium priority, low priority actions. And the ones that we're measuring sort of year in and year out are the high priority ones. Something could get moved from low or medium up to high in the future, of course. But we recently just published, just actually yesterday, just released our first annual implementation plan update. So that was something our board had wanted staff to do after they adopted our plan, was to come up with these annual implementation plans. So it took us almost 2 years to do our first one. We had a lot of work to do to prepare all the information, but now we should be on an annual cycle, and that's posted to the same webpage. So I encourage you to check that out.
Thank you, Lonnie and Brian. We have another question from the Q&A, and there's a couple abbreviations in here. So if Lonnie, you could explain these. So this is a question for Lonnie from Kyle. Kyle asks, is there any further movement on the LRT DTSJ realignment and the BMU pilot program? If this is successful, it could provide an offset for the lack of zero emissions buses, as VTA currently has no active ZEV provider, although Gillig and New Flyer is starting to work on their own battery bus. Also, I believe that the East Santa Clara Transit Corridor is a perfect canvas for climate change preparedness, as it carries the brunt of VTA's presence in DTSJ, downtown San Jose.
Yeah, I got that abbreviation, downtown San Jose. I'm not familiar with BEMU, however. So if Kyle, you want to message me afterwards, happy to, yeah.
And if Kyle's also, if you're still around, do you want to raise your hand and we can unmute you and then you can explain some context? Okay, it looks like Kyle is still on, so if we can unmute Kyle.
Hello, BEMU is battery electric multiple unit, and for what I understand, early last month, VTA was mentioning their what do you call it, a timeline for the future where they're looking at replacing their light rail rolling stock currently. And I believe in 2026, it says that there is going to be a battery electric multiple unit light rail pilot in 2026, which would facilitate a further expansion into the Visona area, as well as the airport, which is basically the current light rail trains, but it runs on batteries.
Got it. Thanks, Kyle.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so my answer to that is there's a lot of factors that we're considering, and we're slowly but surely making progress. So I think that the committees, VTA board committees, and board meetings are probably the best way to get information on updates to these types of programs.
Thank you, Lonnie. All right, and with that question, we're going to close Q&A. If you have other questions, of course, you can follow up with any of us after, but I'm going to turn it back over to Menominee to close us out.
Okay, thank you all for joining us on today. We do appreciate you spending your time with us because you could have chosen to spend your time anywhere else. So we really, really do appreciate you coming and sharing with us, sharing your opinions and your thoughts with us. Again, we will be taking, VTA will be taking comments on the draft cap, and you can submit your comments online at vta.org, or you can send them to by email to community.outreach@vta.org. And those will be due by November the 17th of this year. There's also a QR code that you can scan that's on the side. You can reply, or you can give us comments that way as well. And then also, if you want to engage with the county's Office of Sustainability and Valley Water, that information is also posted in the chat. And I think, let's see if I can share that with you. That's in the chat for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We are here for you. And that concludes our webinar for today. I hope that you all have a wonderful day. And again, we thank you for joining us, and feel free to join any VCA meetings that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.